Hey, what's up? It's Tuhu. I didn't know who to make my next Star Rail guide for, but I sure as hell didn't expect it to be Blade. But not only was he a homie when I was rolling for him, or in other words, he didn't cost 1,000 frickin' bucks like Silverwolf did, but he's also a surprisingly fun character for someone I didn't really care much for as recently as like a week ago. It also helps that he's my first real win DPS character too. So, here's the guide on how to play Rick Deckard, played by Harrison Ford. Blade is a 5-star wind destruction character. He's similar to Arlen, kind of, in the sense that his playstyle revolves around the general idea of him sacrificing his HP in exchange for damage, although he goes about it a little differently. He's also Star Rail's resident edgelord and listens to Fall Out Boy and My Chemical Romance when he thinks no one's looking. The TLDR is this: Blade is a flexible DPS who can deal both AoE and single target damage as a cleaver, I believe the term is called anyway, with the advantage of having the most amount of HP out of any DPS in the game thanks to his HP percent scaling rather than attack percent. He's essentially the Hu Tao of Star Rail, except he's Animo instead of Pyro and not quite as broken, but still plenty strong in his own right. Just make sure Hu Tao never actually meets Blade in person, otherwise Zhongli's gonna be out of a job. As always, let's kick things off with the stats. At level 80, Bladey has 1358 HP, 543 attack, 485 defense, and 97 speed. Right away, his standout stat is, obviously, his HP. He has the highest HP I've seen on any character I have leveled at 80 so far. And while I don't know for sure if he has the highest base HP in the whole game, it's probably safe to say that it's up there as a contender. His attack is pretty low, but his defense is pretty high. This makes sense because of how his enhanced basic, that we'll go over later, calculates damage, since while it scales off of both HP and attack, it favors HP over the attack. And since Blade relies on munching on his own HP and getting hit by enemies to deal damage, his defense being higher than average also checks out. He's also pretty slow at only 97 speed, but this actually isn't as bad as you'd think for him because of the way he plays, but I'll go into more detail about that later when we talk about his playstyle more in depth. Unlimited Blade Works' skill is called Hellscape. If you didn't realize how much of an edgelord he is just by looking at him, you do now. It causes him to lose 30% HP upon use to put him into the Hellscape state for 3 turns. While in this state, he increases his own damage by 12 to 54% from levels 1 to 15, but more importantly, he enhances his own basic attack. Of note, using this skill if Blade doesn't have enough HP won't kill him, it just drops his HP down to 1 instead. Using this skill also does not regen energy for his ultimate, but in exchange, because it's an install skill, it doesn't end his turn, meaning that he's meant to use his skill and his enhanced basic on the same turn, which is quite unusual in Star Rail since most characters have to choose between their basic and skill on their turn. This means we gotta talk about his enhanced basic attack, which is a first for this series. His enhanced basic, called Forest of Swords, first eats another 10% of his max HP, then deals damage equal to 20 to 52% of his attack, plus 50 to 130% of his max HP to his target, and deals damage equal to 8 to 28.8% of his attack, plus 20 to 52% of his max HP to enemies adjacent to his original target as splash damage or cleave damage or whatever you want to call it, all scaling from levels 1 to 9. Again, of note, while Forest of Swords can't regen any skill points, it does regen the same amount of energy for Blade as a skill normally would for any other character. Just like his skill, if Blade doesn't have enough HP for his enhanced basic to consume, it'll just drop it down to 1 instead of killing him. And lastly, the hit counts for his enhanced basic are 2 for the main target and 1 for the 2 adjacent enemies, and it deals double toughness damage to its main target like a skill. Blade's skill is his bread and butter, and the main gateway into understanding how he functions as a DPS. Remember that I said at the beginning of the video that he's kinda similar to Arlen because they both have the Berserker playstyle of losing health to do more damage, but while Arlen has to stay at low HP to get more damage, all Blade cares about is losing his health, and that's it. He doesn't care about staying at low HP like Arlen does, because true to his character, he's mainly concerned with how to keep losing it, as we'll see in just a bit. This is why both his skill and his enhanced basic both consume his HP, so you shouldn't think of either of them as a detriment, unless your healer dies for some reason. Wesley Snipes' ultimate is called Death Sentence, and it's another cleave style attack that first sets his current HP, whatever it is, to half his max max HP, then deals damage equal to 24 to 48% attack, plus 60 to 120% max HP, plus another 60 to 120% of the total damage he's taken in the fight up until he uses his ult to his target. It also deals splash damage to enemies adjacent to his original target equal to 9.6 to 19.2% attack, plus 24 to 48% max HP, plus another 24 to 48% of the total damage he's taken. However, the total damage count is capped at 90% of his own max HP, and it resets after he uses his ultimate to accumulate again for his next one. And its hit count is just 1 for all targets. This ultimate is unfortunately not very strong. If you look at the scalings, his enhanced basic actually has better numbers if you max out his basic at level 6, but keep his other abilities at level 8, since getting there doesn't need any tracks of destiny. Hell, it even has a higher hit count for its main target than his ult does. The two things that the ult has going for it is its better toughness damage against its adjacent targets, and the additional damage it gets from Blade's own HP lost up until that point. The weirdest thing about this ult though is the fact that it sets his HP to half his max no matter what. This means that if he's below half HP, he'll actually heal himself back up to half. So technically this can be a self-heal, though it's not ideal if you use it that way, as you'll see very soon. And if Blade either doesn't crit his ult or just didn't take very much damage leading up to his next ult anyway, his ult damage can be pretty underwhelming. So unless you give him like absurdly high crit rate, treat his ult as a secondary or even tertiary damage source and a toughness breaker instead. And the reason why this is his talent, Shuhu's Gift, assuming I'm pronouncing that correctly, and hopefully I am. This is the reason why Blade loses HP on his own from almost every part of his kit so far, because whenever he loses HP in any way, be it from his own abilities, from enemies smacking him in the face, or even from enemy DOTs, he gains a stack of charge. The moment he gains 5 of these, he immediately throws out a follow-up attack that consumes all his charge stacks to deal 22 to 55% attack, plus 55 to 137.5% max HP to all enemies, and deals standard toughness damage to all of them too, if they're weak to wind of course. In addition, this follow-up attack also heals them for a quarter of his max HP. Besides his enhanced basic attack, this follow-up attack is Blade's other major damage source. Not only does it have great scaling, but it also hits 3 times per target, and if you've watched my other videos, you'll know that higher hit counts are godlike in Star Rail. But I think the most busted aspect of his talent is the fact that Blade is able to take enemy turns and turn them into his own damage. Because Star Rail is a turn-based game, there's not much you can do when it's the enemy's turn to act. This ain't like, for example, Mario and Luigi's Superstar Saga, or another game like it, where you can defend yourself somehow against incoming enemy attacks. No, Star Rail is a traditional turn-based, where you just gotta sit there and watch your characters get smacked in the frickin' face, and you don't really get much out of it other than, like, you know, a little energy towards your characters' next ults, whoever got hit. But Blade, he takes his concept out back and practically decapitates it, because his talent effectively transforms enemy turns into his own utility, assuming they hit Blade of course, because when they do, they're just feeding Blade stacks to use his follow-up attack, which in turn is effectively free damage. And the fact that it can be charged up by both Blade himself and his enemies makes it a core part of his damage output, because he's always gonna get to use it. It's just a question of how often he can let it rip. Ideally, as many times as Guile says his name in an average Street Fighter 6 match. However, keep in mind that Blade will not gain a charge if he has an active shield when he's attacked that prevents him from taking damage, though he still will get one if he's hit by an attack that deals more damage than his shield can block. For this reason, avoid using any shielders on the same team as Blade. And finally, his technique, called Karma Wind. Using it causes Blade to sacrifice 20% HP to deal 40% HP as damage to all enemies going into his next fight. And again, if he doesn't have enough HP to consume, he just drops his HP down to 1. Nothing special or outstanding other than the fact that Blade is basically starting the fight with 1 stack of charge for his talent so that he can get his first follow-up attack of the fight a little faster. Blade's trace tree gives him extra crit rate, HP, and effect res stats. The extra crit rate is fantastic since it's the best bonus stat in the game, at least in my opinion, as is the extra HP. However, the effect res, while it's normally good on almost any other character, is actually actively detrimental to Blade because again, like I mentioned earlier, he gains charge stacks off of DOTs, so if he resists them, those are a couple free charge stacks that he'll lose out on. And with how much HP he ought to have, it's not like those DOTs are gonna kill him anytime soon anyway, or at least they shouldn't. His 3 bonus abilities are Vita Infinita, which increases his healing received by 20% when his own HP is at half or lower, Never Ending Deaths, which heals him for 5% max HP plus 100 whenever he smacks enemies who are already broken with his enhanced basic, and Cyclone Destruction, which increases the damage of his follow-up attack by 20%. Unlock Cyclone Destruction first if you can get Blade straight to level 80 since it's by far his strongest bonus, then Vita Infinita, then Never Ending Deaths because the healing he gets from whoever his healer is will typically be a lot bigger than from, well, you know, Never Ending Deaths. And level his basic, skill, and talent all together with his ultimate for last. Make sure to max out his basic skill too since that's what his enhanced basic scales off of, and again, you can max it without needing a track of destiny like you do for the other abilities. Blade's game plan is pretty much brain dead simple, which makes a little too much sense actually, given that there's literally only one thing on his mind most of the time. Use his skill, spam his enhanced basic attacks until his skill is done, use his skill again when it goes away, use his ultimate whenever he gets it, and watch him go full Dr. Disrespect on people with his follow-up attack. Despite his skill still needing a skill point to use, Blade is actually a very skill point light DPS because he's effectively only using one skill point every 3 turns. It's just that he doesn't generate any skill points of his own most of the time. So he works very well with supports and other teammates who are traditionally very skill point hungry like Bronya. And because Blade's attacks are pretty much all either splash damage or true AoE, Blade is a great hyper carry DPS option because as long as the elite or boss enemies he's up against are weak to wind, he can cleave his way through everything else just fine. As a matter of fact, his game plan is so stupid simple that everything else worth talking about for his gameplay revolves more around his teammates than himself, or more accurately, his choice of healers. Because of his gimmick of constantly losing HP to power his abilities, Blade naturally relies more than usual on his healer than other characters do, so it's important to dedicate a strong healer to him to keep him going for as long as possible. Luolcha is very obviously the best healer to partner with Blade, as I even predicted in my Should You Roll for Luolcha video that I made last month. The potential synergy that I saw in them is not only real, but also extremely powerful, because not only does Luolcha have the ability to auto-heal anyone on his team whose HP drops to half or below, Blade, but the sheer amount of healing he gives goes hand in hand with how much health Blade loses thanks to all the HP stats he should have from his trace tree and relics. For Bailu, I'm not too sure how good she is paired with Blade. In my experience, Bailu's heals individually are pretty weak compared to the other healers, and her invigoration stacks specifically only trigger when her teammates get attacked, not when they consume their own HP like Blade does. The one thing that I can see going for her is the fact that she doesn't have a debuff cleanse, so she won't remove any DOTs that Blade might have, although obviously that's also a double-edged sword because that means if Blade gets hit with any CC debuff, or crowd control in other words, you gotta hold that L until it goes away. Natasha should be adequate since her healing potential should be able to keep up with Blade's HP, though I think she'll have to run Energy Rope so that way she can reserve her skill just for Blade and then use her ultimate to heal the rest of her team if anyone other than Blade gets hit a few times. But Blade may be getting a new go-to healer choice along with Luolcha in 1.3, and her name is Lynx, the 4-star Quantum Abundance character that the Star Rail Twitter account drip marketed before 1.2 started. Her biggest perk for Blade is her skill, which according to the leakers, not only increases one ally's max HP, but it also increases their aggro value to make them more likely to get hit by enemies. This alone makes Lynx a prime healer for Blade, because her skill is effectively not just a heal, but also a direct damage buff, both from the max HP increase and increasing Blade's charge gain for his follow-ups. Assuming that the taunt effect is good and it can reliably get enemies to hit Blade, this should more than make up for Lynx's ult, removing all debuffs from her team, since at this point, Blade doesn't need enemy DOTs at all to feed him free charge stacks. Let's talk light cones. If you can, obviously, pick up a copy of Unreachable Side for him, since that's his 5-star gacha light cone, and it gives him extra crit rate, max HP, and damage, basically everything he wants, but unfortunately, there's no other light cone in the game, or that's in the destruction path anyway, that's an easy pick for Blade, since he's our first DPS who scales more off HP than attack, and most destruction light cones buff attack instead of HP. So the only 4-star light cone that he'd work with readily is Secret Vow, since it at least buffs his damage. And technically all 3 of the 3-star destruction light cones work on Blade, but Collapsing Sky should be the most consistent one. Now for Relics. Blade's 2 main relic sets are 4-piece Eagle or the new 4-piece HP set, with 4-piece Thief being a potential 3rd set since he breaks enemies a lot. While the new HP set should be his main relic set, 4-piece Eagle also can work on a Speed Blade build to have him attack way faster. His go-to ornament set is 2-piece Rudolent Arena, one of the 2 new ornament sets we got with SU7, but he can also work with Inert Salsodo or even Fleet, though Fleet's more of a support set than a DPS, admittedly. Main stats is where things get pretty interesting. Because Blade is pretty slow at 97 base speed, giving in speed boots is perfectly natural. However, thanks to his talent, he can afford to run HP boots instead, since enemies hitting him charges up his follow-up attack, so being slower than his enemies isn't as much of a detriment for Blade as it is for most everyone else. This being said, speed is probably still better for him until at least we get Links, so that way Blade can make much better use of HP boots with her taunt heal. His ideal body piece should be crit damage main stat with a crit rate substat, because he should be getting a ton of crit rate stats from his Trace Tree, HP Relic set, Rulent Arena ornament set, and potentially his Light Cone depending on what you give him. Oh, and also obviously his Relic substats if he gets any. If he still needs more crit rate, run crit rate main stat body, or even HP main stat with good crit substats if you've got one. His rope should be HP. In my experience, he doesn't really need an energy rope, since his enhanced basic also gives him the same amount of energy that a skill would for any other character, and his ult isn't so strong that you should prioritize getting it faster over extra damage for his enhanced basic and follow-up attack. And naturally, his planar should be wind damage. For substats, go for crit stats obviously, HP percent, and break effect with attack percent being lowest priority. Make sure to get enough crit rate substats for either Rudolent or Inert in case you don't have enough, and don't forget about the extra crit rate you get from the new 4-piece HP set in case you're running that, which you should be anyway. And finally, his Eidolons. E1 basically increases his ult's damage by increasing the scaling off his own damage taken, and this is the Eidolon you want if you want to run the HP boot strat on him that I mentioned earlier, and his E2 is his best low Eidolon level since it effectively gives him a permanent 15% crit rate buff. His E4 is a permanent buff to his damage that can trigger twice, and it's really easy for him to get since his ultimate cuts his own current HP by half. And his E6 lowers his talent's charge stack requirement by 1 and increases his follow-up attack's damage by half his max HP, which is a massive buff to his follow-up output when it's already a big part of his total damage output. So in summary, Blade is a great DPS who cleaves everything to death like your average Epic 7 PvP player, so you can imagine what Lakari might think of him. And he does this with his enhanced basic attack, follow-up attack, and ultimate, and his talent uniquely takes advantage of enemy attacks on Blade himself to charge up his follow-up attack, making him the only DPS who actually wants enemies to smack him in the face. No wonder he hangs out with Kaka so much, am I right? All he's gotta do is use his skill once and spam his basics until his skill runs out, in which case he just uses his skill again, and then drop his ult whenever he gets it, and all you gotta do is make sure your healer doesn't die while you watch Blade do his best Markiplier impression on anything that moves. If you found the video informative, useful, or just downright degenerate because of all of these gacha games that I have up on my stream at the same time, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for future Star Rail videos, and if there's anything I missed, feel free to share any extra Blade info or tech in the comments for me and others to learn. Make sure to check me out over at my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ToaSniper98. Stop by if you have any further questions about Blade or Star Rail or just gachas in general, since in case you haven't noticed by now, I'm a bit of a gacha master myself. Thanks for watching, and see you guys over at Twitch. Peace.